Welcome to part 2 of the Plugged In podcast, Beyond the Headlines 2024 Hurricane Season. If you haven't already, be sure to check out part 1, where we go into depth with Al Sandrick from the National Weather Service Jacksonville on how hurricanes form and the historical danger of hurricanes on southeast Georgia and northeast Florida coasts.
Pulling it all together for this year. So, we've talked about conditions are ripe for hurricane formation, and you've talked about that, why that is, and that largely they'll be expected to go to the Gulf and then come across, but that doesn't mean something can't come up the eastern seaboard. You've talked about how conditions are favorable to peak in the oceans in 2 different places, along with our fall full moon tides, that all that is potentially could occur at the same time.
Right.
In I think you said October.
Late September. Middle September and middle October.
Okay. So middle September to middle of October.
Around the 21st of September, a couple of days either side, and about the 18th of October, a couple of days either side.
And we've talked about how lucky we've been. But, as you look ahead to this season, and it is active as we sit here today, we've already had a couple. We've got three out there that are numbered right now.
Right.
What do you want people to understand and realize? How are they supposed to prepare for this?
Okay. What I really need people to take from this as a meteorologist is southeast Georgia, extreme North Florida. We are a very, very hard target. We really are. It takes a lot to get a hurricane in here. Meteorological conditions have got to be just perfect to get a storm in here. And we recognize that. We look for those conditions when we're forecasting a storm and we're forecasting impacts. However, we are not an impossible target like people seem to think. And what folks have to understand is, like we talked about before, that Dungeness on Cumberland Island is the furthest west point on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Think about this. If you just look at it from a longitude point of view, Miami is east of us. Palm Beach is east of us. New York City is 300 miles to the east of us. Mm-hmm. So look at the coastline and look at a map and look at everything from Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way down to Cape Canaveral. It's a big curve. People like to call it the Georgia Bight. Its official name is the South Atlantic Bight. Huh. But the fact of the matter is, it is a big curve right in there with a large continental shelf. That means when we have a storm come in from off of the Atlantic Ocean, and even a storm coming up along the eastern seaboard of the east coast of Florida, this is one of the highest storm surge points on the eastern seaboard. There could be storm surge in places like the city of Brunswick as you get out into the western part of Glenn County towards Buffalo Creek Swamp, I believe it is, or Buffalo Swamp Creek. I get it wrong all the time. Up the Satilla River, up the Crooked River, getting up into Waverly and Camden County. These areas, you can't see water. But guess what? These can hold some of the highest storm surge on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Literally, this is one of those situations where in a strong storm, a Category 3 or a Category 4 storm, we could be telling you to take a hatchet or an axe with you so you can chop your way out of your roof to get to your roof in the middle of the storm. This is nothing to mess with. You don't want to be in your house during those conditions. And let me tell you one other thing about our area. Think about all the estuary system we have. It's beautiful. I love it. I love looking out at the marshes of Glen. But think about all the wildlife that lives out there. The water moccasins, the alligators, the raccoons, the possums. They're all semi-aquatic. They, including the fire ants, do not want to be in flooding. They want to go for the high ground just like you do. And in the middle of a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane, do you really want to be the person fighting with a water moccasin or a raccoon for the available high ground? Because I guarantee you under those conditions, they're more in their element than you are. they're going to win.
Oh, lovely. Yes. So
Well, fire ants. You know, when flooding comes in and hits a fire ant mound, they can evacuate that fire ant mound inside of 30 seconds. They bundle themselves into a ball and they go into hit something that's high. And then they all kind of break up their ball and they go into the high ground. That could be a tree. That could be your house.
So I'm sure you're hesitant to give me numbers, but I mean, when we talk about significant storm surge, how high are we talking?
It is possible in some places in Glenn County and western Camden County, we could be looking at storm surge between 15 to 20 feet above the ground in a worst case scenario. Now, let's qualify that. That's 15 to 20 feet above the ground like we're in a swimming pool because that's the way our model does it. Mm-hmm. So I have a picture that I took in my sister's condo of me in her swimming pool with a 5-foot sign next to me with Dos Equis beer. Okay, so that is what the storm surge model is telling us. It's like I'm in that swimming pool enjoying the day with nice calm water. But in a hurricane, that's not the conditions. We've got waves on top of that. We've got spray that's blowing. We have what we call wave run-up that pushes water even further up in some particular locations. Water will get dammed in locations. There's debris inside of that water. So when we say that maybe, let's say, Waverly in a Category 4 hurricane could have 15 to 20 feet of storm surge, that's still water. Now put 130, 140 mile per hour winds on top of that and 3 to 4 foot waves. It's almost not survivable in some of those locations.
Okay, that definitely paints a pretty dramatic picture,
sorry,
to say the least.
And we'll tell you, a lot of times when we do find storm surge victims, if they haven't drowned, a lot of times we find battering injuries because of the debris that they're in the water with. That did happen during Ian, unfortunately. And then also sometimes we find them with bites from wildlife.
So the bottom line in an effort to avoid all this is if at any time there are calls to evacuate and calls to get out of the area, whether it is in case because we're concerned about storm surge, but obviously wind as well. I mean, it has a different set of issues than water does.
Yes.
And basically what I hear you saying, one that comes up the eastern seaboard, we're more concerned about a water issue. One that comes across, we're more from the Gulf, we're more concerned about a wind event.
Generally, that's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, but if there's a call to evacuate, it isn't merely a suggestion. It means conditions are ripe for a significant impact. And yes, like you said, I mean, I've lived down here now 9 years and there have been several hurricanes and everyone told me before I moved here, there weren't any. And they like to blame it on me that we've had so many. But it's me and everyone else who came, 9-10 years ago. And, we've certainly lived through several. A couple we chose to not be here for. But obviously we have lived through several. There have been significant threats. Dorian was a significant threat and it seemed like it took forever to get here. And by the time it got here, it had minimized gratefully. Idalia, it went from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. And like you said, it broke apart, shifted. So the impacts to the OREMC service area were minimal compared to what they could have been.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Been in this business now for almost 40 years. I know no one in emergency management, no one in the Board of County Commissioners, no county administrators that want to ask you to evacuate your house. There's nobody that gets up in the morning and says, wow, I have the power to ask 10,000 people to evacuate. We don't do that. And I cannot tell you with Matthew, with Irma, even Dorian, the sleepless nights I have had because I know that these people who make that vital decision are hanging off of what I tell them in briefings as to what the local impacts are going to be associated with the hurricane. And I cannot tell you how many nights I have not slept thinking, wow, have I unnecessarily given advice that's going to cause that poor mother to take her 3 children out into the rain to get onto a bus to drive inland? Trust me when I tell you, when we give that advice, it is a well-considered decision. No one wants to do it. We don't. Trust me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we give that advice to the county administrators, to the emergency managers, to the chairmen of the board of county commissioners, those that are going to make that evacuation decision, it is very, very considered. And before they ask you to go, trust me, they consider it. There is a serious danger before anybody gets to that level.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants you to leave your home.
So this is all, to some degree, been quite an eye-opening, dramatic conversation, and our listeners and viewers are probably a bit stunned in some instances in what they've heard and the possibilities of what could occur. But reality is reality, and gratefully we have not been bitten by reality in the last several hurricane seasons. And I always like to say preparation is the best prevention.
There we go.
So the intent of this conversation today was to sort of dissect why all the headlines about this season being a particularly active one, what that really meant, why people were saying it, and how it could truly impact our OREMC service area and beyond. And so I think we have definitely gotten a reality check onto the possibilities and the importance of really tuning in and listening and paying attention when a storm has developed and we hear local officials and weather forecasters, and a lot of people tune to the Weather Channel, whatever outlet you listen to. Everybody tends to get on the same page, based on experts like yourself who are providing that base information. To tune in, to pay attention, and start preparing today for what could happen tomorrow.
Have a plan.
It is key, and we have been talking about that significantly over the last several years, really trying to get our members to get their emergency to-go packs together in terms of water and food and supplies and medications, and just being mindful of what it is you're going to need, and that if you try to do it a day before a storm is going to hit, you're likely to forget something, and you're likely not to be able to get what you need because the businesses around us often shut down as well for the safety of their own employees.
You know, depending upon where you are inside the inland areas of your responsibility, you know, you need to really consider that it could be 5-7 days before they're able to cut their way into your particular location. So you certainly need to be self-sufficient, even in inland areas, for that period of time, and take it seriously. You know, Michelle, it has been a pretty heavy conversation.
Sure.
But I think it's important because this is a very, very vulnerable place, and we don't see ourselves as vulnerable. And anything I can do to try to dissuade people of that opinion, I'm going to try to do, because I know the history. I'm a historian in addition to a meteorologist.
Yeah.
And I know the serious impact that coastal Georgia storms have had. Consider that of the most deadly storms that have ever struck the United States, 3 of them have occurred in coastal Georgia.
And like you said, they were back in the 18 and early 1900s. Obviously, the population and the buildup at this area was significantly different than it is today. I mean, there's been so much growth even in just the last 10 years.
Right. So, you know, nothing would make me happier than to get to November 30th and December 1st and not having to brief the local emergency managers and just having a nice, quiet summer that I can enjoy and go to the beach. But we have to be ready for it, and we have to be ready for a worst case scenario. And then if it doesn't happen, all the better.
All the better. Well, Al, thank you so much for taking the time to come talk with me today and to shed some light as to beyond the headlines, so to speak, and really reinforcing the reality of where we are and why it's important to tune in, pay attention, and be prepared.
Yeah, and hopefully I gave your viewers some insight into what our mindset is when we're briefing key officials and emergency managers. Again, we need to keep it real as to what we think is going to happen. Try not to go to an exaggeration, if you will, of it. We're not doing that to them. We're giving them our best opinion on what we're going to see. And again, this weighs heavily on us. You know, I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I've had from briefings.
I can imagine. I mean, you're holding people's lives in your forecast hands.
And giving friends, because a lot of these county administrators and chairman of board of county commissioners and emergency managers, they're my personal friends. So I don't want to give friends bad advice either.
Well, again, thank you. And for all of you listening and watching, again, now is the time to prepare for hurricane season. Get your emergency kits. Be prepared for 3 to 7 days. Water, food, medications, supplies. Don't forget the special needs of elderly and babies. And don't forget your pets. They're family too. Take care, everybody.